Today we talk to
Thomas Eric Hoeprich.
Where are you from?
I am from the United States. I was born in Baltimore in the East Coast, but I spent most of my growing up time in California.
How did you come to the historical clarinet?
I guess the biggest reason that I embarked on this was, first of all, my first instrument was clarinet, so I was very happily playing the clarinet until one day it occurred to me that there was really not much Baroque music for clarinet, and I loved the Baroque music. I listened to Bach mostly all the time and played anything that I could, but I knew the whole time that it wasn't really written for the clarinet. So I took up the recorder, and that was a way in, and I had some opportunities to develop that a little bit, and so then it became a natural thing then later that I could combine these two things. So the experience with the Baroque and the recorder, and with the classical era and playing on a classical era clarinet.
Can you share a piece of advice that changed your life?
So many things, so many pieces of advice, and also often not even meant as advice, but just people who said something that it intrigued me and interested me. So as a result, it changed my life. I think we will talk about Franz Bruggen in this session, maybe later. I think he was, when he said to me, if you really want to do early music, you must come to Holland. And I did. I think that was very, very good advice. I think I could not have done, had the opportunities to do and the resources around me to do some of the things that I did if I had stayed in the US.
Which musicians have inspired you the most?
As I just said, very heavily influenced by Franz Bruggen. And then there was a kind of, holy trinity, you could say, in Amsterdam of Franz Bruggen, Gustav Leonhardt, and Ander Belsma, the cellist. And these three were very, very influential. They made beautiful recordings, they played wonderful concerts. Leonhardt and Bruggen, of course, conducted, and Belsma just stayed as a fantastic player and pedagogue, and had a big influence. So living in Holland, these three people were extremely important. But of course, outside of that, in the area of early music, there were so many. Nicholas Harnoncourt, of course, the English musicians that in many ways were ahead in a lot of ways with this exploration with period instruments and of course performance practice.
Can you talk to us about the orchestra of the 18th century?
The orchestra of the 18th century is, of course, a very, very important part of my life still, and was when I first started playing with them in the early 80s. I think what was really, maybe one of the most important aspects of it was that we were all so terrible in the beginning. I mean, the orchestra was the concerts, were really, nobody could play their instruments. Franz couldn't really conduct, but we had a vision, and that was what a strange thing, that he got these people together that you would never maybe necessarily expect could play together, or that it would be logical to play together. And then we developed together, and after a while it got pretty good. But we did it together, and that was it's still very moving, and it was very exciting, and I still feel like that spirit is in the orchestra. We don't. It's not enough, to play together and play in tune. It's much more than that, and it's a kind of vocabulary. It's like a family, actually. It's with all of the good sides of a family and the ridiculous sides of a family.
Who was Franz Bruggen?
He actually was my recorder teacher, but he also was very, very instructive in aspects of why music was played differently in the 18th century than it was in the 20th century, and really very clear understanding of what these differences amounted to. And he did. I remember once in a seminar he did something it sounds ridiculous, and at the time there was a lot of eye rolling, we would say. He read a letter that he had. I think actually it was a letter from Luciano Berio. They were corresponding about a piece that he was writing for him, for Brüchen, and he read the whole letter in Italian with English phonetics. So it just didn't really. It was very hard to tell what on earth each word was, and you really couldn't tell. And then he stopped and he said, when you play 18th century music with 20th century musical ideas, this is what it sounds like. And that was really, everybody in the room just, we really thought, oh, yeah, okay, that made such amazing sense to me. It was just, you can't just go in and think, well, I mean, if you're Spanish and you use Spanish phonetics to speak German, forget it. You're not communicating anything. So this was really important. So the flavor, the accent, the style is very important in interpreting music, and it isn't just if I feel it this way, so I'm going to play it this way. That's a very precarious route if you want to get to the intention of the composer. I'm not saying we do, but we probably come a little closer in early music than if you don't know this.
What's the evolution of historical interpretation?
The recent developments in historical performance have become much more of a sort of code. There's a sort of accepted way of playing that has really become a norm, you could say. If you're playing any 18th century music, just simple things like accentuation, understanding that very much if you play a piece in 3, that it's really 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, and 1, 2, 3, 4. I mean, these sorts of things. Understanding what we call bar hierarchy, of course, is very important. That a slur is usually a diminuendo. That articulation. That if you play, for example, if you have 3 notes that look the same on the page, they're never played the same, and that's 18th century performance. And I think this has become kind of a norm now, whereas say 20, 30 years ago, I don't think that was quite as normal. As much of a kind of code, you could say. But that's quite exciting. Sometimes I worry that the young players take it for granted. They didn't go through this experience. They get so much information from old people like me that they don't really they didn't discover it themselves. So they try and discover other things themselves, and that works sometimes. It doesn't always work. But that's the great thing about what we do. There is no answer. There's just tendencies, trends, and then of course ultimately what you think is most convincing.
Do you recommend studying with handwritten scores?
The source material for music is very tricky. There are basically 3 possibilities. There's the autograph, so let's just take Mozart for example. There's Mozart's handwriting. There are copies of Mozart's music by copyists from the time. And there are, of course, our editions. They're all full of traps, I guess the best way to describe it. Mozart didn't write everything in that he wanted. And then when there's a copy of a Mozart autograph or a Mozart piece, for example, there are many handwritten copies of the Mozart Concerto from around 1800, and they don't always agree. You see the taste sometimes of the person who's copying. For example, I have a copy that belonged to Heinrich Bergmann. Heinrich Bergmann himself copied out the Mozart Concerto for his performances. He changed some notes here and there, which is shocking. He did different articulation, which is also sort of surprising. But for him, this was his taste, and this was, the taste probably 1820, 1830, so a little bit later in his life. And of course, we know Mühlfeld played the Mozart Concerto. We don't know what source material he used. But it's very interesting to see what the sources are. They reflect your taste, the taste of the time. But getting back to the original question, it can be very useful, but it can also be very frustrating and sometimes confusing. I mean, let me give you an example. So the trio of the Kegelstadt trio, so the trio for clarinet, viola, and piano. In the minuet, there's a trio. And it starts out with so this little 4-note pattern. Okay, in the Mozart autograph, which we have very clear, there's no question, it's by Mozart, it's his handwriting, it's in very good condition in the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris, so you can look at it. He slurs all 4 of those notes absolutely clearly. The next time the pattern comes in the clarinet, he writes 3 and 1. Da, ya, ta. Even though it's exactly the same motive, exactly the same notes, and then of course it develops, but the pattern is the same. Always these little half steps, very dark and a little bit menacing, a little bit of a 2 feeling also. 1, 2, 3, 1, that kind of feeling. So if you have 3 and 1, it's a very, very different gesture. But the first time when he wrote it, so I think, this is just my personal opinion, that a lot of times they were careful the first time with the motive, and then they weren't so careful after. So later in the autograph, there are places where there are 3 and 1, but also places where there are a slur over 4. I didn't add them all up, but Bärenreiter, for example, a very good press, very, very responsible. They write 3 and 1 the whole time, including the first one. That's a little hard for me to swallow. I'm not going to make a big thing out of it. I think if somebody makes that choice, then they make that choice, and they have all of my respect for making that choice. I think it's important that people know that. There are also some other funny things in that movement. At the end, I won't go into it now, but there are also some, Mozart I think is making some jokes with Stadler and writing the wrong notes on purpose so that Stadler is confused, and it's actually quite funny. But this is also one of those things that it's just so touching. He probably thought this piece was just something he composed really quickly, just for an evening of chamber music with friends. And of course it's a masterpiece, but he probably didn't think much of it. You know, it's like when we play the basset horn trios. It's just, they're unbelievably well crafted, really beautiful, some very special details, and unmistakable Mozart, and what a pleasure to play this music, and yet I'm sure he just, like, this was just something, you know, just 5 minutes. So, and then of course we compare that to something he struggled over, like the operas and like, you know, the symphonies, piano concertos, and so on. We're very, very, very lucky.
Do you think Mozart's concerto breaks the canon of classicism?
My immediate answer is no. My immediate answer is that, and I'm very touched by certain things about what Mozart did. He really loved the classical forms. I mean, and in this, obviously in this piece we have the sonata form and the rondo form, and he loved the structure and the logic that it gave to a composition, but he also loved to play with it and in a way destroy it, wreck it, change it, but he always stayed loyal to the logic of it. And I think, you know, we get the first subject in the tonic key, and then of course the second subject in the dominant. The theme comes back in the recap, just as we would expect, no changes. You know, anybody who knows the Mozart concerto, and that's a lot of people, that they understand all this stuff. So I think, yes, of course he played with it. He changed some things. You know, some secondary material, for example, that appears in the development, not in the recap, just as one small example, is not normal. I mean, but he probably thought that was, you know, it amused him, I think, and also I think he thought it was, he wanted people to stay engaged with the story he was telling, and so that they really did understand that this was something unusual, and which of course it was. But he did that, you know, he did that from the very beginning, and he did it through his entire life. Shocking things, you know. I mean, you could even say that Mozart, every aspect of new music. You know, let's just take bitonality, for example, he would, and obviously in the operas, he's got people singing in different keys and completely different situations at the same time. So that's sort of shocking. He microtones in Musikalischer Spaß, for example. He messes with that. We've already discussed form. It's almost like there's nothing new that any avant-garde composer did compared with Mozart. It was very subtle. It always sounded good, but he himself, I don't know actually what the source was, but I've read a couple times that he himself said that I write music for everyone to be able to enjoy and understand, but always with something for the cognoscenti. And I think that says it all. It's like, okay, we can watch this and just follow the story. Boy meets girl, they get married, they go, right, like that. But you can also see this kind of story with added complications, and which, you know, anybody who writes a great novel, for example, there are the usual elements. There's a storyline, but there's also always something more than that.
Did you rebuild Anton Stadler's Basset clarinet?
Then I met this Pamela Poulin, who had just discovered the engraving in Riga, and she shared the drawing with me. And it was a summer where I didn't have much to do, so I disappeared into my workshop and using the very basic aspects of that engraving, I produced an instrument. By the way, I had been playing it up until that time already, the clarinet concerto and the clarinet quintet, on a very different style of instrument, much more like a basset horn. So it had this sort of block of wood at the bottom and a brass bell even, because I felt that was, from the descriptions that we had, that was logical, that was what Stadler's instrument would have looked like. So wow, what a shock when I saw, and of course many other people saw, the engraving for the first time. But also, when the instrument was finished, it was so much better. It was so much easier to play, and having the globular bell at the bottom was such an incredibly clever way of making the low notes blend in and have the same color as the whole range of the instrument. So, because if you have a regular bell, the low notes really tend to sound a little bit nasty. We might like the fact that they're very loud, but I think that's a mistake. And I think also this is also the kind of the brotherhood that it has with the basset horn, because of course the basset horn has the box at the bottom instead of, well, some basset horns also have this special bell. But the point I'm making is simply that it was a way to make the instrument, the color of the instrument, be more or less the same special veiled sound from top to bottom.
Have you got a historical clarinets collection?
This is one reason that I've been a little bit happy about the pandemic, because I finally had a chance to go through and look at the instruments that I have, which are really quite a few. And a lot of them I didn't recognize. I had no idea where I got them, and many of them are very interesting and very special. I have quite a few 18th century instruments, so not Baroque of course, but late 18th century, and of different nationalities, and that just to take the time to really make sure the mouthpiece is the right mouthpiece, and play the instruments, and you know, that the keys work, and just get a feeling for the difference between a French clarinet by Proudhon and the August Grenzer that we all know and love, and then maybe a Viennese type. This has been really interesting, and I almost don't know what to do with the information, because it's, you know, the clarinet is an instrument that normally plays with many other instruments, so it's not going to change everything that much, but just to have a feeling of maybe just the evolution and the nationalism involved in all this. A clearer picture for me has been interesting. That's one of the great things about having a collection. And just to see the amazing variety and the ingenuity of the makers. The quality of the craftsmanship generally is very high. The way they solve certain problems with just fingerings and the key setup, that there is not one solution, there are many solutions. So today we have such a kind of rigid situation. The variations between instruments are very small. That's fine because the instruments are wonderful. The modern clarinet works beautifully. And back then it wasn't so easy. It depended a lot on where you lived and who you played with. Pitch, of course, was crazy. I mean, it's amazing how high pitch got. It was certainly above 460 in many cases. And so those instruments, of course, aren't very usable now. But still, it's just interesting to see how that influences the instruments.
Are you also a musicologist?
I think we are or should be all kind of musicologists. I think it's one of the great joys of music is knowing a little bit about the background. You can't create a future and move on unless you know your past. And I think it's my job as a teacher and also as a performer to be convincing that really is a good way of looking at it, a healthy way of looking at it. So I'm not a musicologist, of course. If I think about what I've put the most time into in my life and what I've cared the most about and had the biggest nervous breakdowns about difficult times, it's always about performing. And I feel like that has been the center of my life. I've loved the instrument making. I've loved studying in a musicological way, and also, as I mentioned a minute ago, the collection of instruments and so on. That's been really fascinating. But the central theme, or the central point of gathering all this information, is to be a convincing performer and to understand the music and care about the music.
Do you teach at the Royal Conservatory of The Hague?
I've been teaching at the Royal Conservatory for nearly 30 years, a long time. And I think every school, just the whole idea of a conservatory is somehow flawed. I mean, it's somehow got big problems. But I can't think of a better way. So we put up with it and get the best we can out of it. There are moments when it's magic. When, for example, in The Hague we do a project. There was one in November that was just live streamed, and everybody had to sit far apart and all that stuff. And the early music department did the Eroica Symphony of Beethoven, and it was a wonderful performance. It was just great. It was so good for them to have this opportunity, and they gave everything to this. And so those are the moments when you really feel like it's working well. The moments that are difficult are just the usual institutional problems, just stupid things like, is there a room available? Is this keyboard instrument, for example, tuned and available? Are there problems between teachers? So like, it's a little bit of a drama sometimes. But it's like, again, as I said a minute ago, I can't think of a better solution. I've had for quite a long time also, I had the privilege of teaching in Paris. That was a very good early music department, much smaller and much more oriented toward the Baroque, I think it's fair to say. The Hague is really, it's got I think I can't remember in Paris, it was 30 or 40 majors in early music, and in The Hague it's something like 150. So you have such a sort of depth of student population coming from around the world, and coming for that purpose. Like when Frans Bruggen said to me, you really have to come to Holland. Well, coming to Holland meant studying in The Hague, where he was teaching. And I met so many people there that I'm still friends with and colleagues of. And so I think that passing through The Hague has been an important thing. I think obviously the influence of The Hague is much less now, because there are many other good schools with a lot of students, a lot of teachers who studied in The Hague, I might add. I don't think The Hague is the ultimate answer. I think there is a sort of Hague style, and I don't think it's the best answer to interpreting music, but it is certainly an answer. I support it, and I'm still teaching there, and I teach just a couple more years, and then I'll be finished. But I feel very confident that it will continue as a strong force in education for early music.
Do you still play in many ensembles?
I've had the pleasure and the privilege of playing with certain groups over the years, none as consistently and as long as Orchestra of the 18th Century, which we've talked about already. I played for several years with Anime Terna, a Belgian group, and that was quite an experience because this group had the wherewithal and the conductor had the interest in playing quite a lot of late 19th century music, even early 20th century music. And so I had the opportunity to play pieces that I maybe shouldn't even have been playing because they were so difficult. But it was a real challenge, and I learned a lot, and most of the time I really enjoyed myself. And we also just we did a whole program of Liszt and program of Berlioz. Of course, that's more common. Let me think, what else? Tchaikovsky, very early on, before other groups had done any of that. Just stuff that as an early music specialist that I consider myself more or less kind of circa 1800. This was really exceptional, and this provided great opportunities to learn a lot later music, and of course different instruments. So it starts to become a little bit crazy when you think about it. If you play Chalamon Baroque clarinet occasionally, then of course the classical clarinet, then the early romantic clarinet, then the really romantic clarinet, then early 20th century, or say late 20th century instruments. It starts, no, not late 20th century, sorry, late 19th century instruments. So if you want to play Brahms, for example, that's some more different instruments because you'd like to play the Millefeld, on and on and on.
Which concert will you never forget?
There's so many concerts that I'll always remember. The sort of the visceral aspect of, something like playing Beethoven's Ninth Symphony for the first time, or so many pieces. Those initial experiences are unforgettable. There is one sort of one it's kind of funny with the Orchestra of the 18th Century. Once we were playing in a festival, and the concert was outside, and it wasn't very good weather, and we were in a kind of shell, and it was threatening to be a storm, and we were doing Beethoven's Sixth Symphony, and in the storm scene, it really started to storm. There was lightning and there was rain, and it was just such an amazing thing that this actually was happening as we were doing it. And then, as we got to the end of that movement, it lifted. I mean, I don't think the sun came out, but the storm stopped. So that was sort of, you felt a connection with something bigger than what we were at that moment.
Can you share a funny anecdote with us?
One thing about playing early instruments is that they're very simple. The keys are held on with just little pins and not with screws, and so there's sometimes a little bit of insecurity. And I can remember a concert once where I was suddenly real aware that the instrument wasn't working properly, and I looked down and one of the keys was about to fall off because the pin had come out, and the pin was perched on the stage. And of course, as luck would have it, I reached down to get the pin, and I missed it, and moved it, and it fell in a crack. So it disappeared. And this is, during a concert, so this was a little, luckily at that moment, it wasn't something particularly prominent for the clarinet. But as a clarinet player, I think I was playing the B flat at the time. The A clarinet was there, so I took a pin out of the A clarinet, put it in, held the key on, finished that stuff, and then the next time I needed to switch back to the A clarinet, I took the pin out and put it back in there. So you just sort of, but it was horrifying and kind of upsetting in equal measure with just unbelievably funny, because what are the chances something like that would happen? You'd reach for it and then push it into make the whole situation was already bad, it made it even worse. So that's something I can laugh about now. I did laugh about it at the time.
If you weren't a musician, what would you like to be?
I feel completely convinced that the best thing you can do with in your life is be a musician. I think music and performing music is so important and so wonderful that I'm so happy that I had the opportunity to choose this. I had the freedom and I was in the situation where I could make a kind of choice. I was always, you asked earlier about musicology. I was a good student, and when I went to, I did a university degree in philosophy. I liked reasoning, argumentation, logic, and then of course ethical aspects of these things too. Philosophy is still a very interesting subject to me, and at the time it was considered good preparation for becoming a lawyer. So those are things that sort of interested me. But I think now, looking back, if I had spent my life, if that had been my career, you know, the whatever it is, 40, 50 years that you spend in your profession, I think that would have been a little bit of a poor choice, if you understand what I mean. My life wouldn't be as rich.
What do you appreciate in a performer?
I think that being a good musician is like being a good artist, any of the arts. I think it's really important to be very open, very curious, willing to try more or less anything, maybe even extremes at times, and maybe not. So because it has to be an effort, a group effort, most of the time. And if you are able to do that, and if you are somebody who inspires your colleagues and the people that you're working with, then I think that's the thing that I appreciate the most. Just, you know, bring what you have and let other people bring what they have, and find a way to make something unique and special out of it.
Do you have any advice for the Clarinetistas del Futuro?
I think the next generation of clarinetists is almost frightening in how good they are. they just seem to have everything. Technique and ability to deal with those aspects of the music don't seem to be an issue at all, and also just an openness and a curiosity. I'm very impressed. So I would just say, stay with it. Don't lose your faith that there will be a place for you. I say to all my students when they finish, I say, you know, the years now are probably going to be the hardest years of your life, because you've had the structure of the education for so long, and now here you are in your early 20s, or maybe even older in some cases, and now you have no structure anymore. It just is you and whatever opportunities you have and whatever opportunities you create, that will be the way forward. And that's really difficult. It was very difficult for me. And to find your unique voice and find a way to give what you can give is hard to find. It will be harder for some people than for others, but it will happen if you just keep your vision and keep in mind what you have, that are not what, but that you have something special. You have your own story to tell, and that's what everybody wants to hear. They don't want you doing someone else's story. Just be yourself, be unique, and keep trying and practice. And I wish all of you a good read.